Warning. This content contains really seriously bad accents and impersonations. But it's just for fun.
Hello, and welcome to Nikki Gets Bored, the show where Nikki gets bored and learns something and then tells you all about it. Is that really all you do? Anyone can have a YouTube show. I should need no introduction. I am the king of the Holy Roman Empire, King Charles V. That'd be a large bit of Europe that I own, and don't tell anyone, but my empire is not holy or Roman or even an empire. What's important for you today is that I am the king of Spain. Why I'm wearing a Mexican sombrero, you might ask? I have a sombrero because I am sending my people there to take over the land. My fellow royalty and I are going to reenact a completely false retelling of things happening in the early 1500s. Well, chaps, I don't know about you, but all this fighting is rather bothersome. Don't you agree? See, I agree. We But what else are we supposed to do? Go around wooing women all day? Oh, that does not sound too bad. Does anyone else have a surplus of flags? I have all these flags. If I don't take your lands, where will I place them? See, lots of flags. Yes, lots of flags. We lots of flags. What if we send our people to other lands and claim those lands as our own? By George, we can place our flags in those lands. I think you've got something. Colonization does seem most logical. Last one to the fleet of ships is a rotten egg. Wait! Can we start after I kill my queen? What number is this one, Henry? Do you think he keeps track? We will not wait for you, Henry. Instead of beheading them, try loving them. The French do not have these issues. Luckily, this did not happen. This was just for fun. We fought amongst ourselves and only got along when we needed allies. Nonetheless, most of Europe did end up getting the colonization bug. Nikki will explain the rest. Well, thank you, King Charles. Today's show is about smallpox, the smallpox outbreak of 1520. You know, all the epidemics we've talked about have been the same. We've done smallpox, then bubonic, then smallpox, and bubonic again, and today it's smallpox
Not again.
yet again. I was worried because not only is it smallpox again, I figured we'd be talking about the intentional germ warfare that Europeans did to Native Americans. There is so much to hate about U.S. history and the near genocide of an entire indigenous population. It really fuels my hate fires. No worries though, I put on my big girl pants and started digging in, finding I was totally wrong. Today we are talking about the purposeful, almost genocide of an indigenous population. We are going to talk about conquistadors and the accidental almost genocide of an indigenous population. As the kings described earlier, colonization was happening. It seems like all of Europe decided all the world should be civilized like they were. They would conquer other areas, already inhabited areas, with people that were doing just fine on their own. They would form cities and make laws and force religion on natives. There's enough colonization that happened. I can do an entire series on showing who took what and what they did to the indigenous people. But we're talking about epidemics. All that matters for us today is that Spain decided to colonize and bring Christianity to the people that Columbus found in the Indies, which is actually the Americas. We all know Columbus wasn't the first to discover America, right? In the early 1500s, Spanish warriors called conquistadors headed west to take over the Indies, aka the Americas. One conquistador was Hernan Cortez, and he is the start of our story. Hernan Cortez has a really long name that I won't share. Remember, dates and names aren't as important as learning the lessons of history. Unless your field is history, you're studying for a test, or if you're really into trivia. Ooh, let's have a sidebar that you have no choice about. Do you know how many questions on Jeopardy I've answered correctly just from starting this show? It's a lot. When I average 30 correct answers a game, I'm going to try to get on the show. Right now, I'm averaging in the low 20s, but I'm coming to meet you, Ken and Mime. Back to Hernan Cortez, who had the chance to do something really super worthwhile. He came from a good family, and that family wanted Cortez to study and get a good job. But instead, he was more fascinated by the ships coming back from the Americas. He thought that was where he would find adventure and power and wealth.
Money, money, money.
When he was able to leave, he set sail for what is now the Dominican Republic. He worked some silly paperwork type job, but he heard someone was going to take an army to what is now Cuba and claim it for Spain. So Hernan Cortez, he joins up with this group of conquistadors, and he heads to Cuba. He works his way up in the ranks, getting pretty high up there. And then he starts hearing stories of a
city built from solid gold
in what is now Mexico. So Hernan, he gets permission to gather troops and go to take over the land and to bring gold and prosperity to Spain. So he gathers ships. He gathers around 500 to 600 men and their slaves. At the last minute, the man in charge tells Cortez, nope, you can't go. It's because Boss Man doesn't want Hernan Cortez to be the one that gets all the gold and fame first.
Money, money, money.
Cortez was all, sure thing, boss. Then he gathered his men and he skadoodled right on out of there.
Let's scram, bros!
On the way, a slave that did not have immunity to European illness caught smallpox. By the way, the Spanish definitely stopped in Africa on their way west to gather themselves some slaves. Spain is only a hop, skip, and a jump away from Africa. Technically more like 8.9 miles of a swim to get to Africa from Spain. These freshly acquired slaves they got in Africa, they didn't have any immunity yet. Whoa! Foreshadowing. Can you feel the doom building? The place Cortez was heading to was the civilization of the Aztecs. It was the biggest one around in Mexico at the time. When Cortez arrived in Mexico, he found tribes and people that hated the Aztecs. So he gathered them to his armed forces. He ended up with a huge army. He came over with 500 to 600 fighters. He gathered another 200,000. That is a lot of hate for the Aztecs. Why did so many people hate the Aztecs? Well, let's have a little Aztec history. The Aztecs weren't the first civilization in Central and South America. The Olmecs and the Mayans came before them. But the Aztecs were the greatest yet, by which I mean the strongest. They had a hierarchy, much like Europe, with an emperor, the nobles, and priests having power. They believed that life was kind of crappy for humans, and all these terrible disasters that just keep happening. They believed it would keep getting worse, and eventually an apocalyptic event would happen. Now, it was the job of the priests to maintain the happiness of the gods, to prevent the apocalypse, and they did that by sacrificing humans. Human sacrificing really freaks us out. But let's try putting ourselves in their shoes. You've been told since birth that if a human isn't sacrificed, the world as you know it will end horribly. If that's really what you believe, then people are inevitably going to be sacrificed. That's just the way it is, no matter how horrible it is. There was hope, though. There was a prophecy that a savior god would come to put a stop to human sacrifices. Oh, foreshadowing. The Aztecs were like many civilizations of the past. They would go to surrounding lands and fight and win against other people in Mexico, and then force those they conquered to give tribute and people for sacrificing. All these other tribes and villages were sick and tired of giving tribute and having their family members killed for someone else's religion. Wouldn't you be? We're talking Hunger Games strife in Mexico. So yeah, these people were all too happy to join Cortez to fight the Aztecs.
I volunteer as tribute.
Cortez finally gets to the Aztecs, and he doesn't even take all his men with him, which is just silly because the Aztecs have a history of kicking butt.
Oh yeah, we kick butt.
Instead of walking into a fight, though, he's welcomed with open arms. Welcome, Hernan! We love you! Everyone is so welcoming that Cortez decides, well, I'll just nab the emperor. So he does. Emperor Montezuma II. He takes him and he takes control of the Aztecs. What the deuce, right? The Aztecs should have been able to take Cortez. Maybe even if he brought along all 200,600 men in this army.
Oh yeah, we kick butt.
So what happened? Remember that savior that was coming to stop the human sacrificing? The foreshadowing from before? The Aztecs, they had this prophecy of a savior god named Quetzalcoatl, the feathered god of the sun. It was said he would be light-skinned, have a beard, and be arriving from the east by water, and was due to arrive the very year and month that Cortez showed. The sun would have shined on his and his fellow conquistadors' armor, making them look like sun gods. The Aztecs had heard that Cortez was coming, but they thought their savior god had arrived. So Cortez matched this prophecy, and they were happy to have him, to their detriment. Here's some food for thought. The prophecy sort of did come true. Cortez was a light-skinned, bearded man from the east that arrived by water. He was shiny like the sun, and he would have seemed like a much more powerful being to these people. He brought Catholicism with him, a religion that believes one man made the last human sacrifice and no living thing needs to be sacrificed again. He even arrived at the right time. I call that a fulfilled prophecy. How did someone in the past prophesize this? The other side of this coin is that if there was never a prophecy, most likely the Aztecs would have seen Hernan Cortez as an invader and kicked him back to Cuba. So was this a true prophecy or a terrible coincidence? Makes me wonder. The Aztecs now conquered. Cortez and his men start gathering riches for themselves. Woo! Riches, glory, and fame! Then Cortez gets a warning. Remember, he snuck off to Mexico, against orders. Well, Spain was now coming for him. You can't just ignore orders. So he hid, leaving behind about 80 of his original men to keep things status quo. Of course, without their leader, the men left behind to maintain things, they started killing the Aztec leaders and making things miserable in general. At some point, Emperor Montezuma was stoned to death, and I'm not sure if it was by the Spanish or his own people. By the time Cortez got back, there was an uprising of all the Aztecs.
We're having like an uprising here.
And they had a new emperor whose name was Cuitlahuac, I think. And all the Aztecs, they ran the Spanish out of Mexico. Getting back a lot of their treasure along the way, kicking butts and taking names like Aztecs do.
Oh yeah, we kick butt.
This all happened in the year 1519. Another thing that happened, Spain brought over illness that the Mexican people never had before. Influenza, measles, malaria, chickenpox, yellow fever, and smallpox were all brought. All illnesses made their appearance, but none so much as smallpox. Remember that sick slave on the way over? That,
Foreshadowing.
well, he accidentally infected other slaves that had recently been acquired, thus having no immunity, and the indigenous people in Mexico, not just the Aztecs, were all infected. No one on this continent had ever had smallpox. They had zero immunity to it. Smallpox was the big one, but everything the Spanish brought were European diseases that no one in Mexico had ever seen at the time, much less have any immunity to. The Mexicans were
Doomed.
That's my line. Doomed. 2 years later, Hernan Cortez went back to Mexico in 1521 to conquer the Aztecs for good. When he arrived, he found so many were already dead, and most of the rest of them were too sick to move. Even the emperor Kutlahas died from it. 40% of the population died. Cortez took over the place. Flags were placed, Catholicism was taught, and colonization of the Aztecs by the Spanish happened. This is the story of how Spain nearly wiped out an entire country. Today, Mexico is a Spanish-speaking country and is predominantly Catholic. Clearly, the Conquistadors changed the course of history for Mexico. This story is the start of a lot of Mexican history. So how did the Aztecs handle smallpox? They had never seen this before and only had past methods to rely on. The healers worked with herbal medicine that didn't work for smallpox, and the other treatment was called temizcales. I'm saying that wrong. Temizcales, and it was basically a sweat lodge. Herbs were burned and heat was gathered in a small room, and they would jam people in so they can get the heat in the herbs. We know that distance from others does work. So we also know jamming a bunch of people into a small space is just going to cause the illness to spread. But they didn't know that. It kept killing natives for 70 years. Just like the Antonians plague, there was so much death that massive funeral pyres were used to burn the dead. Just like before, entire families died, so houses would be pulled down to bury the dead. Because sick people couldn't move without being in extreme pain, many people died of starvation with no one there to take care of them. Also, because their religion had the belief that gods do this, they allow death and misery. If they want to, the gods can do it. So many didn't even bother trying to fight the illness. They accepted that the gods wanted this and they just wasted away. Have we learned anything from this? I can only think of one lesson that isn't a repeat from another show. We already learned that going to war is bad, and that would include conquering other lands. Russia. Not too much later in history, the British will give blankets used on people that died of smallpox to the Native Americans on purpose. They learned the wrong lesson.
You chose poorly.
We need to learn the right lesson. There are still many humans living far enough from big civilizations that they haven't been in contact with a lot of diseases the rest of the world has. However, civilization is getting closer and closer. So think about like South America, of all the small tribes of people still living a hunt and gather lifestyle, or the outback in Australia, or parts of Alaska, or parts of Africa. I'm sure I'm missing many. As we make the world smaller by spreading further out, we have to remember these people have never had contact with these diseases. When we start to invade their areas, which we shouldn't even do, we need to bring vaccines, treatments, and awareness to them. We need to learn from history so we don't make the same mistakes again. Colonization caused a lot of history to be lost, and disease killed the people who knew that history. We as human beings, we can't let that happen again. We gotta work on it, people. Today's poem is going to be in the style of a limerick. It's not an actual limerick because limericks are about silly things, and there's nothing silly about smallpox or wiping out civilizations. This is just in the style of a limerick. Also, there's a cuss word in my poem in case you don't want the kids to hear. But after all, a limerick is meant to be silly, which it can't be today, or crass. That's what I'm going to do. So, a non-jovial limerick. Conquistadors sailed over on ships and made everyone very, very sick. They thought Cortez was a god, but Cortez, he was a fraud. Man, what a bunch of dicks. We've conquered another plague. Up next, I think, is more bubonic, but I'm ready for a new disease. You might be too, so I promise we switch to cholera soon. Let's all try to remember that being a good person also means trying not to get others sick. Take the day off if needed. If you're starting to feel sick, don't go out with others. Use common sense. Small self-sacrifices go a long way to make huge differences for other people. I am going to go snuggle now with Sir Bubo's Pugsley. Tune in next time for some nuggets of learning when Nikki gets bored. Wait! Welcome right back for an ALS update. Today I want to talk about pee. This is my pee. People in my family are going to definitely judge me for this, but I don't care. So I have a pee bag now, and what I have in place is called a suprapubic catheter. I think I'll look it up a little later. And it connects then to a hose and then to this bag. And you don't have to look at my pee anymore, although it's a very healthy pee. Thank you. So with the suprapubic catheter, it's a catheter, but it goes into my body just above my where should I say this and not sound too dirty. It's between my lady bits and my belly button. So it's in there somewhere between my lady bits and my belly button. It goes into my skin and it goes all the way down into my bladder. This way, the pee just comes out on its own. Now, why this is important to me is with ALS, getting to the bathroom, it's not easy. It's not. Standing is not easy for me, and a lot of people with ALS can't stand. Eventually, I won't be able to stand. But getting to the bathroom on time was a really big problem for me, and this is the solution. I don't have to worry about rushing to get to the bathroom. It was something that when I still worked was a big problem. I would wet myself at work, or I'd have to wear a diaper to work, and that doesn't make you feel successful or confident. So it was a real problem for me. And getting this, there are negatives to it. UTIs are very common, and that's normal because you're putting something that doesn't belong in your body. But as long as you keep fighting those and make sure those don't get out of control, it makes my life so much better. So much better. I don't have to schedule my day in 2 hour periods where I have to come back in time to pee. So that's just one piece I wanted to tell you is that that's one thing I don't have to do anymore. It's lovely. I have a leg bag too, and that's fun because when I go out, I can't lift my leg to get it into a position to dump it into a toilet. So I just go find a patch in the yard. As silly as that is. But now I'm going to say I pee like a dog in the yard. Uh, but most importantly, I'm comfortable I'm happy. This might be an overshare for some of you, but this is life. People getting older need this. People who have other, medical problems, they need this. It's a really good solution, and I really, really am happy to have it, and kind of happy to share it with you. So I hope you enjoyed my little tidbit on my suprapubic catheter. Oh, by the way, I named it P-Bob. So if you ever hear me say, oh, P-Bob, this, it's my catheter. So I leave you. I do. I love you all. I hope you pee well. May your pee ever stream clearly. Love you all. Bye.